Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Monica Wedlock Kilpatrick, and I serve as the Director of Connect Ministries for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org/mental-health. This webinar continues our 2018 series of webinars and educational trainings offered by the NBA Mental Health Initiative. And today's topic is Pastoral Vulnerability, Navigating the Nuance of Disclosing Clergy Mental Health Challenges. Learning how to hold and talk about mental health within the church is a gift in and of itself. However, how pastors and church leaders balance the art of sharing their testimony of living life with mental health challenges requires a special type of skill, support, and wisdom. During this webinar, you will learn from the trials and testimonies of clergy and church leaders who've courageously disclosed their own mental health challenges and continue to pastor and live whole with mental illness. We will address the power of testimony, the role of clergy, and art of creating a culture of mutual dependence. Panelists will address practical ways clergy can navigate professional and personal boundaries, build a support system, and know when and how to share their testimony of mental health maintenance and recovery. This webinar can be used as a tool for discussion, a call to action in congregations, regions, and even the general church. At the end of this presentation, there will be time for questions. So throughout the webinar, if you have questions that emerge, we welcome you to use the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. Please include your email address so that if we are unable to answer your question, we can follow up with you directly after the webinar is over. And to request technical assistance, you may also use the Q&A feature. If you're participating by phone, you may email me at mkilpatrick@nbacares.org. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing on the NBA website in the coming week. To begin, let me introduce our speakers. The Reverend Tracy Siegman is the newly appointed senior pastor of First Christian Church, Covington, Kentucky, where she began just this month and is excited to strengthen the church's relationship with their neighbors and form new partnerships. Reverend Siegman grew up in Northeast Ohio, earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in management from Walsh College in Canton, Ohio, and a Master of Divinity from our very own Lexington Theological Seminary. She has served churches in Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky, and has an extensive volunteer background serving in after-school programs on various nonprofit boards and as a member of the Kiwanis Club. She has a passion for outreach ministry and advocacy for social justice, and currently serves as our Mental Health Initiative Mental Health Justice Task Team. Sarah Serrano is a licensed clinical social worker who provides services to the community through her mental health counseling practice, Bienestar Counseling and Education. She said she is enjoying the adventure of a lifetime in her role as a wife and homeschooling mother of 2 little boys. She loves worshiping and serving alongside her community of faith, Central Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, in Coral Gables, Florida, and has been an active member of the Mental Health Initiative Resource Task Team. You can learn more about her work at bienestarce.com. Dr. Mark Poindexter has been a Disciples pastor for nearly 3 decades and has served both the regional and general church in numerous ways, including a camp counselor and director for 20 years, co-chair of the Indiana Regional Discernment Task Force, regional moderator, and a member of the General Board. He was published in Guild Press's Best Sermons in Indiana and has written numerous articles about the intersection of faith and culture for the religious blog, Demergent. Mark served in the United States Marine Corps from 1980 to 1986, and he's also run 13 full or half marathons, completed 5 triathlons, and rode his bike covering the state of Indiana 4 times. Reverend Poindexter is a suicide survivor and is open about his battle with severe depression and testimony of living a fruitful life with mental health challenges. And Angela Whitenhill serves as the NBA Mental Health Initiative Manager. She's an innovative family and children's therapist, as well as a licensed minister with experience in the mental health field and higher education, and with proven success in interdisciplinary program development, bridge building, and organizational leadership. As a licensed clinical social worker, Angela specializes in trauma, suicide, depression, identity issues, and spirituality integrated psychotherapy. She formerly served as a chaplain and therapist at the Tennyson Center for Children, an NBA Health and Social Service Ministry partner, and one of the Rocky Mountain region's leading residential treatment centers. There, she helped create one of the nation's fully spiritually integrated residential treatment programs. She's led and facilitated multiple training workshops on therapeutic intervention and cultural competence within the social work field. Angela earned a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Denver and a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary in New York City. She also earned a certificate in marriage and family therapy from the Denver Family Institute, where she served as psychotherapist at the Institute's community clinic. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Angela and our speakers. Thank you all.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you all for joining. We have a really interesting topic today, one that many of you know has been so live in our congregations and churches. It's a topic of disclosure, of boundaries that is alluded to, but never really quite parsed out. And so we hope to take our time with this topic today, have multiple ongoing conversations about it. And today we'll start with thinking through some of the beliefs, the stigmas, and the starting steps on how clergy might think about their own mental health and disclose or share any challenges they have. And so with that, just to get started, I would love to start with our panel and ask the question, why do you feel, or why is it important that clergy disclose in the first place? Why is it important that we share our mental state with either family and friends or with our congregations?
Well, I think one of the reasons that it's important for clergy to appropriately disclose their own struggles is because it helps us to live more authentically and honestly among our people, which is the basis of true community, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Anybody else?
It really helps the congregation also see the human side of our clergy. It's important that that everybody in the congregation realizes that, you know, who is serving us is someone like us. Mm-hmm. So it humanizes the clergy in the eyes of the community.
Mm-hmm.
In the midst of reading a book by Henry Nouwen called The Wounded Healer, and in it, in the introduction, he writes that the best way for clergy to really enter into a deeper understanding of their ministry is when they make their wounds available as a source of healing.
Mm-hmm. Just to kind of piggyback off of thinking about our own health as clergy, just as humans ourselves, I love how you said it humanizes us, that it's a burden. Holding or hiding something is just not a burden people should have to hold. There are some other professions where people are very open about who they are, where they are in their health. But in this particular profession, the balance of having to walk people through their hardest times in life, mm-hmm. and then not being able to express something that you might be struggling with, mm-hmm. can really affect your own mental wellness, the stress and the disconnectedness of performing that which you can't have for yourself can really cause burden. So just as a wellness tip, it's something that we should be free, right? As Christians should be free, but also just as to be healthy in our careers. It's something I think we should move towards.
I think when we take the opportunity to share our own struggles with others, instead of holding them in, it does help to validate their experiences as well. It gives them the opportunity to know that they can share and not have to hold everything in.
Mm-hmm. We're teaching and modeling. So, yes. You know, the clergy are teaching and modeling healthy behaviors all the time, you know, as we learn them from scripture, as we're guided by God to do so. And so when a clergy person shares, they're teaching other people that it's okay to share your burden. So
absolutely.
It normalizes mental health as well. I think it's not a matter of if someone in your congregation has a mental health illness, it's a matter of who. and whether it's they themselves or a family member or someone they care for.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. I think one of the things we're trying to do through the Mental Health Initiative and in the life of the church is break the stigma around mental health. And we found that clergy can be amazing models for that. But we are learning as a body on how to hold this theologically, how to hold it through our spiritual practice. And therapists can't necessarily, they can help us with that. Some of our therapists can, but the mental health field is not going to necessarily help us with our spiritual development in relationship to our mental health. And so having a pastor do it for themselves and then share that, like you said, Sarah, and like you said, Tracy, is like how it's really giving us the ability as congregants to see how we might do the same thing just because it hasn't been a part of our conversation. So.
Correct. It's invaluable. It's given permission to. It's opening the door. So.
And clergy tend to be elevated as somehow superhuman. And by disclosing the struggles that we have as a human being, it's easier for them to relate to us and understand that we are human and that there is no need to make us somehow divine or misunderstand our role as clergy.
Definitely. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, and of course, I know in the back of our heads, everybody's thinking, but. So let's move into what are some of the barriers that keep us from doing it? If it's so healthy, why don't we do it? What's floating around in our congregational cultures in our own lives that keep us from disclosing?
I really think that in our culture, in this talking, especially in the United States and America, it is the word vulnerability. It's associated with weakness, and weakness in negative sense. A weakness in the negative sense, because we know that in kingdom thinking, in the kingdom mentality, weakness is associated with it as a conduit for the power of God. So to move through our lives and let it be flow and let them do just wonderful things to glorify his name. But that is not how many people see vulnerability. You say vulnerability and immediately you think of weakness. I cannot be seen as weak. And as long as we have that, we hold that concept with that type of definition, it is going to be very hard to share. Very hard.
I think in some cultures, mental health illness can be seen not only as a weakness, but somehow as a failure. Some may even see mental health illness as a demonic possession. And so we need to break through that barrier and give a new theology to what it means to have a mental health illness.
And I think within our culture, there is still an overall stigma with mental illness, that it does incorporate the words failure, weakness. As a man, I'm not tough enough. And we need to dare to be open about our struggles so that we can show folks that that's just part of our humanity.
Definitely. Yeah, along with that, we talked about just education, and a lot of it is we just don't know what it is, right? So we don't even know how to make sense of it spiritually, and we rely on, like you said, Reverend Siegmund, the traditional theology that we're sick or somebody failed, and so really needing more mental health education around what it is, what it isn't, the biological parts of it, the social emotional parts of it, so that it could give us language to think through.
I think in my previous experience in the congregation I served, that was part of the struggle. If I had had an illness that would have been recognizable, seen, or more accepted, people could have responded in a different way. But with a mental illness, there was just a lack of understanding how to respond to me in that time of need.
It could also be used against you as potentially a sign of professional competency. I know in one instance I had someone question my mental stability because they knew of my illness and didn't see any evidence in my leadership, but was mad at me about something, so latched onto that.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's so many mental disorders don't necessarily affect our jobs. I mean, it's not, it might be in another area of our life, but
Correct.
it doesn't mean it does, or it doesn't mean it affects our spirituality the same way. And so I appreciate you naming, and the more we know about what these are, we might know we can't make that jump every time. Any other barriers?
I think the less we know about something, the less responsibility we feel to act about it. It's that, head in the sand type of thing. So a lot of times it's fear of the unknown. A lot of times a big barrier is, I don't want to know about this, because as soon as I start finding out about it, then I have to act. And it could be something about ourselves, or it could be something about somebody close to us, in the church that we know of. We just won't go there, because then that means I have to do something about it. So a big barrier sometimes is willfully ignoring the situation. I find so.
I think we'll keep bringing these barriers up because they float throughout a conversation, but one of the things that we've heard a lot of is theology and its belief system. And so we want to spend some time on that today, particularly for those of us as clergy out there that are currently in the midst of a mental health challenge or crisis, trying to make sense of it for our own selves, needing help understanding, but also those of us helping other people. How can we think about mental health differently that's more supportive of who we are? And then what do we do with it? And so as a group, we kind of thought through, there's different types of vulnerability. And this is important because as we think about how we believe, how we respond, one of the first starts is to differentiate different moments in our vulnerable stages. And so we came up with two kind of spheres of vulnerability. There are many others. And so you might ask a question about something that's not on here later on in our conversation. But when we're thinking about, sharing, disclosing, talking about it, we thought through two different times. There's a moment when we're in need as clergy or helping professionals or leaders, when we're struggling ourselves and we're still not quite have overcome it or even made sense of it ourselves, but we are literally in need of help. And so we're sharing to get assistance, which is a beautiful thing. And then there's the moment when we're sharing to serve others, right? We talk about testimony service, we talk about our wounded healers, sharing ourselves. And so we want to really differentiate those two and parse them out. Any other thoughts on just this idea of when we're in need and when we're in service in terms of type of vulnerabilities?
I think the timeline is important to take into consideration. When you're in need, you're in the midst of it could be, depending on the situation, it could be an episode, it could be a crisis. It could be the tail end of it, but you're still in need. You're going through a situation where you need support, where you need somebody to be there, where you need to talk something out. So that is the timeline, your own timeline, not as determined by somebody else, but as determined by where are you in this, especially if you've gone through this before. As many of us know, some of these issues are ongoing, and you have times of stability, and then you have times where things are not as stable. They're workable, you're functioning, but you understand that, kind of like your floor is shifting a little bit. And that insight that you have into that when things are, if you're cyclical, things are happening, you're in need. You're in need.
Definitely.
I think too, it may be unsafe to share when we're in need, because we are looking then for help from people that we are, as leaders, supposed to be helping. So when we're sharing in need with the wrong group, then we're not looking for help from the appropriate sources.
That's good. Like the boundaries crossed without even knowing it. Sure.
I think one of the things that I learned in my experience, and Monica mentioned in the beginning that I'm a suicide survivor, it took me almost 4 years from the effort I took to take my own life before I even began, I could speak about it publicly in any way. And I don't know that I would describe myself in need that entire time, but I had to make certain that I was through it enough so I could use it in a way to help others. And that was a long period for me, 4 years. And when I shared it with just a small group, I would only share it with 1 or 2 people, very quietly, so that they could keep an eye on me. But as in service, it was 4 years for me.
I appreciate you saying that, because I actually was bulimic. I had an eating disorder for about 10 years. And I remember I got caught by an RA, and she's like, go to therapy or tell your mom. And so there's this outing of a sense, which was helpful for me in that moment for what it was, but it wasn't my whole community. But within the church, I didn't really say anything like you for a while. And slowly, as I made sense of where I was, I started writing poetry, and it came out in my poetry. But the poetry had this triumphant witness to what God has done. So I felt power. I felt agency. I felt very free to say what it was, because I'm saying, hey, this is what God did for me. And so I do think it's important that we protect our own emotion.
Absolutely.
We go through some things that sometimes I think as Christians, we think, oh, we have to share, to share about what God's doing. But if I'm still feeling shame or feeling wounded by it, it's okay to not share yet. It's okay to share when you're like good, when you're happy, when you're have overcome it. And I think that's the beauty of like the in-service part. It is what you said, Sarah. It's on your own time, and that's a really beautiful thing.
The word I would use was raw. Everything was still too raw for me, and to wait until then, it did become an opportunity for me to say to others, not only about my own humanity, but if you are going through this, there are people who will care for you. And I thought that was important.
I mean, that process of coming to the realization that you need help is one that can be slow. So, going, just even, acknowledging to yourself, sharing with yourself, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves permission, but sharing with ourselves. And for me, with postpartum depression, it was just like that. It was really hard for me to even speak it out loud. And I remember exactly, I had the picture exactly in my head of when I did it. I remember I was laying in bed, and I turned to my husband and I said, I think I'm depressed. And he looked at me and he goes, I know. Right. But I just had to say it. I just had to say it. He knew it. I knew it. I just had to say it. So that was the first step in my process of being in need. And then after that, it just went to my pastor, my leader, where I felt like I needed to speak with him. And it was a long process. But it was one that I was very, very, as a therapist myself, I just, it was hard. And I'm thinking, but I do this with other people every day. Right. And clergy, you guys are always encouraging people to, healing, to a path of healing and to share. But it is so hard when it comes to our own journey, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I think it's a journey from crisis to acceptance to healing to where you get to the point where you've theologically reflected on what's happened in your life. You've begun to see how God was working through your healing to get to a place where you can actually offer some theological reflection on mental health, illness, and how God works in that time, to where you get to a point where you're sharing in need, in service.
And we'll move on to our topic, but just to name that sharing in need it's hard, but it's such a beautiful part of spiritual growth, I would say, because when you share in need, you're sharing with this like catch me feeling, like I'm depressed. And there's a need for that person to affirm or respond. And for us as leaders who are always leading everybody else, it is a beautiful thing to be held. I think about my friend who's a beautician. When she gets her hair done, it's just, she soaks it up because she never gets her hair done. And so I want us to think about sharing in need as a time where we get services that we offer, and learning to sit in that and really soak it up and share the right people. We'll talk about who to share with, but that being a very important step for our mental health, but also for our own, we deserve it. We deserve to be under the.
And that's part of the barrier. We have all these things that we know we give, but then we have like these things, do we deserve that, or should we take from that? And the answer is yes.
Yes. We're going to get into those beliefs. So into our theological beliefs, wrapped around this moment of sharing a need and then sharing in service. So here are some beliefs that we've thought about that could help us think through what it means to share in need and to share in service. With that said, just thinking about, again, what are some of the beliefs that we either have or that we want to transform and modify so that we're able to share in need with joy, with, you know, expectation, and in a healthy way?
When I think about depression, or when I'm in the crisis of depression, I have a sense of feeling forsaken. And so what I draw on during that crisis, or when I reflect back on my depression, I think about Christ hanging on the cross and him saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I'm able to understand that Christ knows what it's like to feel forsaken. And so he understands what I'm going through in my feeling forsakenness and depression.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think part of much of contemporary Christianity in America, there is this feeling that the only response to the gospel is an overwhelming happiness all the time. And I think we need to be more honest with that, especially as we look at the scriptures. I turn to Psalm 31 quite often because the words there are about being a broken vessel and being hurt. And that authenticity and that honesty by a writer of the scriptures just really speaks to a part of my journey. And as Tracy just said, Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? I know in my experience, the idea of God being completely absent, Deus absconditus, just where is God in this, was something that was a definite part of my experience. And only after reflecting back, I see the holy presence in that time.
Definitely. I think that question of where's God and why would God, if there was a God, why would this be my situation, is something that constantly comes up within the therapeutic field. I get that all the time. Were you going to say something, Sarah?
I think that I always think about the list of the heroes of the faith in Hebrews 11. And you read through that, man, and you can't find a single one of those characters, of those people listed there, that didn't have a dark moment, like we have number 2 here, dark night of the soul. You know, where they just, God, where are you? Where are you? So, and they're heroes of the faith.
Yes.
As
which I think you bring up a norm in our text that is a norm in the mental health world, but isn't a norm in our congregational culture. That spiritual crisis is not only normal. In the therapeutic world, we would say a crisis is almost healthy, like we have to keep going. And so this idea of being, you know, not winning, not overcoming, being an unknown, being in dark places is being normal, as being part of the experience. If we can look at our text and see how often it shows up and give it that much.
A necessary part of the journey, if you would call it like that. If our life is a journey and we're going to get to that finish line, and that's, you know, Hebrews 12 goes into that. So it's a necessary part of our journey. So you can't get to the finish line without going through the journey.
I think one of the powerful stories of Elijah, after this great victory that he had up on the mountaintop, it's then he finds out that his life is in danger, and he just runs and feels completely forsaken. And it's in that moment that he experiences God in a new way, in the silence, and I think that can be, you know, a good metaphor for many of our journeys.
Definitely. Something you all strike in me is this, what contends with our comfortability with the unknown, and we talk about the theology of the known. We need a new theology of the unknown that helps us sit when we aren't in the great spaces, but really norms. So social norms really combat that. I think about loss. Grief and loss is probably the most difficult experience in our culture because there's no space for it in our culture, particularly Western culture. And so the norms of how you might be, you might not want to go to your friend's party, you might not feel like eating, you might not do these kind of norms and the pressure to do them, and then people not knowing what to do with you, so they pull away. But really thinking about that if we can make spiritual crises or different crises we have normal, then thinking about what norms we have to adjust for that in our life or in our congregations. If there's more mourning technique or quiet spaces or spaces that would allow for us to not do the normed behavior if that's not fitting us in that moment.
Yeah.
I
think go ahead.
I was teaching Bible study several weeks ago and talked about a dark night of the soul or a crisis of faith or a time when you're searching for God's presence. And the group kind of looked at me like I was an alien, like they had never experienced a spiritual crisis. And for me, those times of searching for God, trying to find, making meaning of what's going on, those are the times through which I grow the most. And so making those normal and sharing that those are opportunities for growth can allow our people to understand that they don't have to hide what they're going through, that by sharing what's going on with them, they can grow. And in that darkness or the dark night of the soul, I think about Jesus as the light coming into the world, and he can come in and remove us from the darkness, and that is growth.
Right. Understanding, when we label things, when you talk about normal, I just think that a lot of people would, maybe if it's unknown, then it's not normal. They just one with the other, and we label that, and that's not true. And maybe getting okay with the fact that I don't know about it, that doesn't mean it's not normal. And when sharing in need, an important thing you need to realize is that the person that you might share with might not understand what you're going through, but that does not mean that they cannot walk with you. And if we can separate those two things, because we tend to want to talk to somebody who's been through it, which is fine, which is great. But that person does not have to understand what you're going through. They may not have gone through depression. They may not have ever have been suicidal. But they can still walk with you, because a lot of times what we need is somebody to listen, somebody to pray with us, for us, somebody who can check in with us and ask us, how are you doing today? So separate, don't bulk everything under one column. If it's, I understand it, so it's normal. Because when you don't understand something, if I don't understand why God is, this timeline of mine, or these issues, why am I going through this? I might not understand it, but I can work myself through trust. I can work myself to trusting in that God sees further than me. He has the picture. I have the moment. I have the puzzle piece, but he has the whole picture.
And there needs to be a sense of trust where you can trust in God, that God is going to help you through whatever you're going through. And you can only rely on God if you trust that there is a journey ahead. That
there's something in front of you. I want to talk about unknown, and we'll bump to the next one. But this idea of like an overarching culture of unknown is just kind of our culture in the American side. We, like you said, we have to know. It's part of it. It got us kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? We wanted to knowledge of tree. We want to know. We want to know. And I feel like it's a reworking of what is, right? So sometimes I think some people go through crises, and God feels inaccessible, and God may be the one being in that person's life that they don't want to react to, that there's some animosity or hurt with, yet and still there's a peace or a grounding in, I'm going to be okay, or I have people to touch, that they're trusting, like you said, Reverend Stigma, in something, that there's a journey ahead. And so I want us to think about that yearning versus felt experience. Like, what does it mean to keep pushing through, that the unknown is okay. And the unknown, like you said, is not just normal. It's really what is to come. It might become normal, but it's that new thing that the Spirit is doing, and not trying to box it or find security in what is, because the constant growth. And so one of the theologies that we really do have to build, a theology of the unknown, that is okay to not know. We'll jump to the next slide, and we'll come back to this idea just to make sure we have time. But now, just thinking about sharing in service, What is that like? What are some of the theological beliefs? What are some of the motivations that help us when we're thinking about sharing in service?
For me, my story of salvation, the way through which Christ healed me and brought me on this journey of faith, is my story that I share with others. I can't talk about my salvation or being saved without talking about my mental health and the journey I've been through toward healing. And so my story is a story of salvation. It's a story of healing, and I share it with the hopes that it will bring healing to others.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Well, I think more than doctrines and dogmas and creeds, which we pastors can be full of, we need to teach people that God is active in our lives, even in times when we think God is absent. And so letting people know that there is a living God working in the midst of this crisis is, I think, a way to let people see that this faith we proclaim is not something that's just millennia old and we have to go back to find an active God. God is present now and working in the midst of this time.
Yeah, definitely. Just to jump on that, the idea of the sharing, like I mentioned earlier, that the sharing of how you came out, or like what, or still in, but how God has met you. I think of Hagar and how, she's ousted into this wilderness and no one saves her. Her body is used and her child are out there with nothing. There's no liberation. There's no, victory. But it says God came with her. And this idea of God being with us, like Emmanuel with us, like you said, is so powerful. Beyond doctrine, it's the experience of what God did for me to help me while I was still throwing up my food. Once I was out, it took me 7 more years. And the steps that it took to get there is so powerful.
Well, I think it's also important to, when you are in the midst of a severe depression like I was, the only reality you see is what's inside your head almost. And as I've been able to share my story more, I've talked about the number of things that I've experienced now that I never dreamed of before. Experiences that are new and exciting and that God had in store for me even in the midst of the crisis. And that has been an important part of, I think, helping other people to heal some.
I think that hindsight is one of the most wonderful products of the crisis. I do believe it, because you said it. I totally agree with Mark. When everything is just dark, and then there's like this cloud around you that doesn't see you. You can't see behind it. You can't see through it. You can't see. It's like a fog. And then when you are at that point of, you're in service now, and you look back, what you see, it's definitely not what you were looking at when you were in there. It's like a bird's eye view now, as opposed to when you were. And that's so important, because the people who are listening to us are in the cloud sometimes. They can't see, but when you connected right there, I said, I know how it is, or I felt that I was in that cloud, and this is what's behind the cloud. This is what's behind that fog that just doesn't let you see past the next hour, really, sometimes. And they can find that hope. It's really about hope. It's really about, if he did it for you and God loves me just as much as he loves you, something's going to break here. Something's going to happen. So I love that. I love that aspect of sharing and service.
With those and listeners, other conversations will move, but if you see our slides here, we'll come back to these in details of how it humanizes us as clergy, how it gives us, our dignity back. And then we talked a little bit about how it helps us teach others. But I love how you said it is the power of our testimony. That is the witness we are as Christians to say, this is what God has done for me.
Angela, I would like to say one thing that kind of related to the last thing and is part of being in service, and that is to break some of the cultural norms. One of the things that I think shows some of the most painful words people can use sometimes, it shows some of our overwhelming cultural attitudes, is get over it. Just get over it. And I think we need to teach this isn't something that all of a sudden you get over.
Mm-hmm.
It's a part of life that becomes part of who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and then you learn to live with it. But I just felt the need to say that.
Yeah, I think as we give our testimony, it's not a matter of we've reached a point of healing and it's not something that we deal with anymore, like other people with other illnesses. We have healing in that we get on a journey of diagnosis, treatment, medications, and so forth, but it's an ongoing journey that we make with coping with mental health illness every day of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I vacillate between depression and anxiety, so that fog about me changes colors as I move from depression to anxiety. And so sharing is also sharing kind of the breadth of what coping means.
Yes.
And finding hope regardless of where we are that day.
Right. And I appreciate you all and this idea of normalizing that it doesn't, some of us it doesn't end, but like for most of us, it is a part of our life. It was not supposed to be, but it's a part of the human experience. And so what if norms change to say, hey, like, I think, anxiety's happening. This is my cloud that I'm in right now. If we can share that in our prayers, if we can just openly Facebook, hey guys, I'm feeling this way, or it's not so stigmatized, it'd be just as fluid as I got a cold today, or, it's hard to get up because it's so cold outside. It'd just be something that's normal. And I just thinking about maybe not so much that we are ill, that we are wrong, that the norms in society are not fit for human experience. They weren't constructed for the
They
fullness
restrict
of God.
us. They're restrictive. So, and the concept that change starts with us, I mean, that's a powerful thing, be the change that you want to see, that, it's, people say it, but it's so true. People just flippantly, be the change you want to be. Start the conversations, when you're sharing your teaching, we have here Humanizing of Clergy. You teach healthy expectations. How do you want your community, your faith community as a clergy to see you? You teach them. You teach them what to expect from you, and that's a great place to start.
And Christ was 100% human as well as 100% divine. As we share our stories and humanize ourselves, we allow ourselves to be 100% human and take away the expectation that somehow clergy are divine in our calling.
Immune.
That's right. That's right. I know we're getting close to questions, and so we'll probably take questions and come back to one of our last slides.
Okay? If you want to take a few minutes and keep going, you can.
Okay.
Go ahead and finish that last slide.
Yeah. And so all this we'll come back to, but the idea of sharing pyramid, this is somewhat of the first steps, the practical part of this. And we'll have more webinars and blogs coming out for more practical, but really thinking about an order, or at least for us, how do we share? Where do we start? And we thought through that first starting at the top in this sense, really talking with family, intimate circle, and friends as a starting point for who you would tell first. And there are a lot of different reasons as to why that may be. I know there's a thought on why we would tell our family first or our intimate circle first.
So I think as a therapist, right? And it's so important to have that's your people, those are the people that are going to have your back and whatever happens. Ideally, obviously, that is not the situation in every family. However, those people in your intimate circle, I mean, those are the people that are also that have been walking with you. They might not know why you're acting this way. They might not know why you're irritable. And sharing with them first, it's going to open a lot of doors of, all right, we can work with this. We can do this, So it's very important, especially your spouse. Let them in. Let them in.
One thing I know what comes with sharing with your family is that sometimes, or friends, sometimes it's also their story, depending on how close they are to you. And so just being able to make sure everybody's on board that this might come out is important. But there'll be the people there when it goes to different levels, that they're really there with you for the long run. With that, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as we share with our family, there's kind of a back and forth between sharing with our therapist and sharing with our family, because as we learn about what it is that we're experiencing, we can go to our family and say, this is how you can help me through this. Understand that I have some anxiety today and I don't want to be around people. Or I'm experiencing depression and it's really hard for me to get out of bed today. And no amount of just get up and do it is going to be helpful.
I appreciate you lifting up the therapist. And so, I mean, the next kind of tier would be, we're of course promoting this idea of having professionals in our lives, therapists, spiritual directors, professional support, GALs or case managers or whoever who is trained to be not emotionally attached to your situation, in the sense of they don't know you that same way. And sometimes that's really important because they can see outside the situation, whereas somebody in your circle, there might be something at stake for them. They might have their own emotion around your mental health challenge, but a professional is trained to just help you through the process. And so we encourage people to seek professionals, and having a professional doesn't mean that you are crazy or weak. It means you're very smart.
Yes, it does.
In all realms of our life. You're trying to buy a house, when you're trying to, you know, any other part, we go seek a professional, and this would be the same moment to do so.
Correct.
And I think it's okay to pray for you to find the right professional to help you. I prayed when I moved here for the right professional, and I found someone who is not only my therapist, but also my spiritual director. So I get the gift of 2 in 1.
Yay! Awesome. That is awesome. Any other thoughts on just professional help in our lives? Just a quick one. I love this section. Sometimes what's happening for us is biological. And so having someone who knows the body, who knows, hey, it's not that you didn't pray enough, your hormones shifted on you. So there's people who know more than us, which is a beautiful thing, and can give us insight as to what's happening for us sometimes that maybe our family couldn't. And then they can also help our family walk with us, our circle.
Right. The objectivity is the key, though, in this, I think. It's somebody who can be objective amidst the whole issue.
With that, moving into the next tier, trusted peers, clergy peers, people that, you know, have your back or want you to succeed in your career and in your life. Pastoral relation committees, some of us have those that work in that same vein. But people who really are supportive, and you'll see this is kind of the middle block here. This should still be in an intimate circle. These are still people who are not public, and there's not anything at stake if you share. There's a clear importance of naming that, because you move into board, elders, church leadership, you start turning into the professional part of things, the element that could affect your job. And so there's a different kind of stress when you tell an employer than when you tell a peer in that way.
Yeah, I think it has to be fully acknowledged that the relationships between pastors and congregations are often very complex. And where the pastor feels confident in sharing, at some point, especially if it's a severe crisis, there's got to be some sharing. But we recognize that there can be a dance sometimes.
I love what you said, between the professionals, the trusted peers, they will help you navigate how to share. Like, you know, there's ways to share without having details. There's ways to share that sound, the euphemism that make it seem, oh, we can handle it. But other people outside the situation have done this before, can help you in that way. Yeah. And with that said, we lifted up our congregation, our community. We encourage that this be the last group of people. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes your mental health is outed, or something happens where people are asking. But the idea, you never have to go into detail. You never have to fully disclose despite the situation. And we're not saying that it's unsafe necessarily to tell a congregation or community, or it's not right to do this. Eventually, we'd love everyone to share. But there is a level of, we said, leadership that you take, a level of power, and then to protect your own emotions, protect your own journey through it. There's a moment, we think about devotion, when you wake up in the moment, it's just by yourself with God. There are moments in our journeys where we just need to by ourselves with God time. And so leaning into having walked through these stages, the board, elders, and church leadership can also help you think through what you might share and how you might share with the church.
And as you're moving through this pyramid, you're moving from being in need and sharing in need to being down at the, the yellow, you're sharing because you're in service to others.
Correct. And the timeline, remember the timeline. This is, nobody else sets your timeline.
Mm.
You are setting your timeline, and somebody might do it in 6 months, and it might take you, and Mark was talking through this, 4 years. You have to know what feels okay. It's a process of discernment. It's a process of prayer, as Tracy was sharing with us. You determine when it's okay at any level, at any of those levels, really. Every level has a timeline. Every level has a process. And allowing yourself to go through the process of every level is the most beneficial and the healthiest way to do it, as opposed to skipping and going. So,
friends, I'm going to jump in right now. And first of all, just thank you for the powerful dialogue that you all have been engaging in and leading us in. Thank you, Tracy and Sarah and Mark and Angela. There was a comment that came that I think is important to hear, as one of our fellow friends is sharing their story. So the person writes, my parents are pastors, kind of retired. They're 83 and 75. They do not believe that as pastors, they are allowed to be depressed, and have been suppressing it for over 13 years after the passing of leukemia, passing of my brother to leukemia. Now my mom has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and my dad refuses to accept her condition or the fact that he needs help himself over 2 years after diagnosis. And this person just shares this as a comment of how bad, how challenging this can be, this reality can be. As you can see, they haven't even gotten to the congregational conversation, but just within the family as church leaders. And so I wonder, one of the questions we had was, what do you do if you know your congregation or church board, in this case, your family member, will not accept your or their mental health challenge? What advice could you offer around that?
Sharing with family. Again, we just want to open a door. I think the first step of acknowledgement is any door. You open any door and you have half a foot in, and that's progress. And a lot of times, again, we don't want to measure progress against anybody else's. It's getting in there and just acknowledging. If this couple acknowledges, even verbalizes it to just one of their children, that is progress right there. That is progress right there. Everything has to start somewhere. I believe. I also, kind of touching on what if somebody doesn't understand or somebody doesn't agree, you're not going to have 100% people on board with you ever. And a lot of times you got to do something knowing that there are people that are not going to be. It's a process. And I think that's one of the issues, Angela, I believe we're going to touch on some other webinars that we do about this. It's that it's not going to be 100% agreement, but there's the pros and cons that have to be weighed. There's a process for that. We'll go more into that later in another webinar, but what is best for the majority sometimes it's what leads decisions for the leadership in a congregational type of sharing. So
I'm just going to add to that a lot of times when we don't accept, there's just a lot of shame. It's a lot of, there's just so much going on for us. And so as a family member, sometimes I just try to create safe space in general. I try to create moments where if somebody drops a cup, oh, it's cool. I try to create an atmosphere that mistakes can happen. I'm always edifying their self-esteem, lifting up their worth and their value, their identity that's not tied to their competency or tied to the very thing that they're protecting. Really kind of massage an atmosphere that people feel vulnerable about anything. And if I can't get to that, but really making sure they know, hey, I love you no matter what. We're going to add things to that.
I think the opportunity for healing really starts with acceptance.
And just quickly on that, there is for some mental illness, severe mental illness, there is a part of the symptom where the brain cannot be aware of its symptom. So the person is not ignoring it because they don't want to.
Right.
The brain is actually not able to recognize that they're not functioning the same way. And so just knowing that depending on where they are in their mental illness, kind of similar, dementia is not mental illness the same way, but similar to where maybe dementia, people don't know they're having it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is one of those moments.
We also received a note from one of our participants that I think exposes a little bit of hope for what happens when you share. And Terry writes, although timing is critical, I have found that disclosing to the congregation opens so many doors. Many people come to whisper in my ear, "Me too," to borrow a current buzzword. Yes, it is scary, but I chose to take that risk because of the great benefit of others knowing they are not alone, or sinners, or possessed, or abnormal. We are all broken in different ways. So I thank you, Terry, for sharing that with us and for your courage and being vulnerable to those you may be leading and the community in which you're serving. This is not a end of the dialogue. This is just a start, I think, to this dialogue, and there's so much more that we could share. This certainly is not something we want to end here. And so Angela and I are thinking on behalf of our MBA Mental Health Initiative of how do we continue this conversation in the coming months and as we look into a new year, to keep this conversation going, to continue to create space for people, leaders and others, to be their full selves, to be accepted as their full selves, as God's creation, to seek and find the help that we each need at different moments in our lives, to be as healthy as we can, but also to offer our best gifts to God and to one another. And so thank you so much to our panelists for your vulnerability, your honesty, your great wisdom, and your experiences, and what it means to be vulnerable as pastors and leaders, as caretakers, and those who are in need of care at times yourselves.
Yeah.
This ends our webinar today, sadly, in many ways. I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all for your time. We invite you to please consider the many ways you and your congregation might get involved or further your ministries in becoming welcoming congregations for those who've experienced or are currently experiencing mental illness, mental health challenges. How do we put mental health wellness as a priority in the life of our church and communities? Today's webinar recording will be available on the MBA website soon for your convenience, and we invite you to share this resource with so many others. And to get connected to the MBA Mental Health Initiative, please email Angela at awhitenhill@mbacares.org, or just visit the MBA website at mbacares.org/mental-health, and you'll find her email there. We also want to invite you to join us next week. We have another webinar hosted by our MBA Prison and Jail Ministry on Restorative Justice 101. Will be held on next Wednesday, August 29th at 12 Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. And our presenters will be Reverend Nora Jacob of Urban Mission Community Partners in Pomona, California, and Reverend Dean Bucalis, MBA Prison and Jail Mission Specialist. For more information and to register, again, visit the MBA website. We invite you to like us on Facebook. We think you have. We hope that you have. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and visit our page for more information related to Disciples Health and Social Service Ministries and for our upcoming events. Thank you so much, and we hope that you have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.